Hi, everyone, and thank you so much. We are thrilled and honored to present during this wonderful conference. And so we would like to talk about Ukrainian Tartini at the Russian court. Um, there's so much to talk about, but we will just try to at least mention the most thrilling highlights of the whole story and hope for further conversations and discussions. Of Kazakh's origins, Ivan Khandoshkin, who is considered the father of Russian violin playing and often called the Russian Tartini, well, much information about him remains missing and is presumed lost. We'll speak about the highlights that we'll explore further in a few moments that we listed here. That include his professional activity, also his connection to Ukraine, and the cultural elements that he included in his works. So, in this regard, I would like to share small personal story with you, which I thought about during my preparation for this presentation. So I grew up in the city of Dnipro in Ukraine, and while we like those days, we often think about what will children of today who experience the current Russian aggression and the war in Ukraine, what will they say? How will they reflect on these times, and which kind of narratives um, they might get from this time. So I grew up in the independent Ukraine. I was born 2 years before the Ukrainian the Soviet Union was dissolved, and so this construction, so this Catherine's Mile in Dnipro was actually very close, is still very close to my school, and I saw it every day. And I grew up with narratives that Catherine was the one who created the city. So there was barely nothing but the Catherine. She came and created the city. And I was a child, and the way I understood it, there was like literally nothing, just a field. And I imagined this field of folk and this golden carriage that appeared from somewhere. My imagination just like created this picture, and there was suddenly Catherine coming out of this golden carriage and bringing a stone that she decided to put on the floor and say, "Hey, this is where the city of Dnipropetrovsk will be." So this is how I understood this. I was also wondering how she carried the whole stone by herself. This was the main interest of myself when I was like 7, I guess. And then I thought, like, well, how did it actually fit into this golden carriage? Because this is an unusual stone to carry. Yeah, but and later I started asking questions for sure, and discovered so many more things, that there was actually not just a blank field, but indeed people, and those were Cossacks, and there was even a Cossack siege that Catherine uh, dissolved and crushed. So so this is actually a central point to so many other connections that also are connected to Khandoshkin and so many other Ukrainian composers. And if we speak about composers and think in this regard, so many links to discover and to think about. So many things in Khandoshkin's life and his works are also kind of this symbolic Catherine smiles, where we see the shape and can understand the meaning according to the information that is available to us, and the rest we can guess. Um, so, in regard to Ukrainian traditional music and the elements that Khandoshkin included also in his music, in his pieces, there are some elements that we just need to keep in mind and consider, because they are no stable units and flexible elements. They tend to not to remain stable. So, such as regionally specific aspects of Ukrainian traditional music, the links to the languages and dialects, the perceptions of the Ukrainianness of the music, the wish to demonstrate it, or maybe to wish not to demonstrate it, the Russian and Russianness and different types of perception of this term, and the term of lit Russian that is being used in the literature a lot. So the context of specific musical aspects of traditional expressions, such as modes and ornaments, sound types, the questions of ethnicity, belonging, social status, and prestige, which is also important to mention, especially in the context of the court, in the choices that are made in this regard. Traditional music versus elite presentation of such music changes the sound and styles. So, yeah, now we switch to the next slides.
So Ivan's grandfather, Lukian Khandoshko, came from the village of Veliki Perevoz, Mirgorod district, Poltavska province, Ukraine. According to the archives there, Lukian was of Cossack ancestry. In the 1740s, Ivan's father came to St. Petersburg to join the court choir as an adolescent. He would have his son, Ivan Khandoshkin, 7 years later, and a similar destiny awaited him. According to Adayevsky research in 1850, Ivan Khandoshkin was raised in the orchestra, unquote. Ivan proved himself to be an extraordinarily talented violinist. From 6 years old, he was given violin lessons by Italian Tito Porta free of charge, and at that time he was retired from the Russian court. There are speculations of Khandoshkin traveling to Italy to study with Tartini, and we'll see a little bit later about it. At the age of 13, Khandoshkin joined Peter III's court as a violinist and continued in this role to the court of Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great was keen to maximize Russian appearances to mask her German origins. Having an Italian trained violinist from the Russian Empire was an effective way to maintain the Russian image of Catherine. It is likely Khandoshkin was involved in a variety of court projects, such as performing his famous improvised Russian and Ukrainian folk songs, variations, acting as concertmaster of one of the orchestras, staging a ballet Reign of Olive to a libretto by Catherine the Great with Gasparo Angelini and Canobio and Pushkevich. Khandoshkin's life at the court was mostly connected to reign of Catherine II and Grigory Potemkin. Potemkin oversaw the Greek project, the expansion to the south of Russia, Crimea, and towards Constantinople. As a commander of New Russia, southern Ukraine, Potemkin kept close with many ethnic Ukrainians to spread Russian influence in southern Ukraine. An extraordinary opportunity arose for Khandoshkin in 1785 when Potemkin offered him a position at Ekaterinoslav, so that's Dnipro, which I was talking about. So Ekaterinoslav Music Academy in what is currently Dnipro, Ukraine. Immediately, Khandoshkin was released from his court duties, received retirement payment, and the new director's salary. The primary challenge for Khandoshkin faced in his new role as a music director of the Ekaterinoslav was that the city did not exist yet. Ekaterinoslav was to be situated at a point where Dnipro River turns 90 degrees south. The potential city was thus meant to symbolize the southern direction of Catherine's ambitions. The name of the city literally means glory to Catherine. Between 1785 and 1790, architect Ivan Starov presented a plan of Ekaterinoslav city with Preobrazhensky Sabor, Potemkin's palace, which you see here, theater, archiepiscopal house, silk factory, and university, along with the musical academy or conservatory. Potemkin insisted that the city would have the first music academy in Russia. The new city was to be built on the hills, recalling ancient Jerusalem or Acropolis. It is if it had been built, it would have been the first music academy in the Russian Empire 80 years before the one in St. Petersburg. While Ekaterinoslav did not exist yet, a temporary colony was established in Kremenchuk, a neighboring city. That's where Khandoshkin was, that's where some of the organizing and classes were happening. And out of the city, one of the first buildings was the Potemkin's palace, of course. Giuseppe Certi was to compose for the grand opening of the academy and to teach composition and singing. For 4 years, Khandoshkin stayed between Kremenchuk and Moscow, likely taking trips with Catherine and Potemkin to see progress in Ekaterinoslav. So about Certi. He was appointed as a director of Ekaterinoslav Music Academy in 1789. The reasons Certi was appointed over Khandoshkin's aren't clear. Some say it could be related to Catherine acquiring a new lover, Platon Zubov, who favored this famous Italian composer over Khandoshkin. In any case, following the decision, Khandoshkin moved back to St. Petersburg, where he was involved in the court of Pavel I, teaching violin and publishing his scores. Talking about publishing scores, at that time it was in its infancy in Russia at that time. Some pieces were published by Khandoshkin in Russian Empire and others in Amsterdam. I just know that he used most of his money to publish his works. That's why we're lucky to have a lot of them available right now. Supposedly, Khandoshkin borrowed a large sum of money to keep up with publishing expenses, and he died in Moscow at the age of 57 from heart paralysis while in line to receive his pension payment. And this is another one, so you can see this is a score for Demidov, for the funded by Demidov. This is 6 sonatas, also mentioning Demidov here, and this is the 6 ancient Russian songs that one of them we're going to play at the end of this presentation.
Yes, so for this presentation, we have been wondering how far did Khandoshkin include his connection to Ukraine into his work, and how far did he want to do this? Did he want to do this and didn't have a chance, or didn't he want to do this? So here you can see another monument, which is also pretty interesting and symbolic, because it combines, so it has for sure the Catherine on the top and some guys that she is basically standing on. So you can see Potemkin on the other side, and also this Black Sea Cossack army. So they are present together, as we can see, but also the Ukrainian musician, the blind Kobzar. So, and the fact of his presence here is also very important. So some sources, different sources actually, link to the fact that Catherine really liked to include music of different nations and ethnicities on the court for different reasons. So in some cases, it was helping her to demonstrate the military successes and the fact that she conquered some new lands, and they are like when they made this visible that those are different ethnicities, it helped her, it helped the show right on the court, because there were also many different guests from different countries, and she could kind of showcase this. On another side, when they had people like Khandoshkin, where they could say, look, we are really proud of this guy, and he is actually Russian. So he was really presented as a Russian musician and the father of Russian music school. So there's actually a pretty interesting, I'll just read a small excerpt from the article by Lebedeva-Yemelina. At the meeting of Catherine II with the Austrian Emperor Joseph II in Mogilov in 1787, it was repeatedly emphasized that the two largest European empires should divide the space of Europe. Vienna is the heiress of Rome, and St. Petersburg is the heiress of Constantinople. Potemkin knew that no other leader was capable of implementing such projects, of overpowering Potemkin, overpowering Russia's gigantic geopolitical pivot of the south. During the journey of the empress to the ancient Taurida in 1787, many had the impression that the annexation of Crimea was the beginning of the Greek project, so the building of the empire that she was envisioning. During the celebration of the Taurid Palace, elements of Greek culture and mythological allusions were also supposed to undoubtedly remind those present of the most important mission of Russia. Despite the damp spring weather that prevailed in April 1791 in St. Petersburg, the atmosphere of the southern region was created in the winter garden of the Potemkin Palace. Trees typical of the Black Sea coast grew in the tops: lemons, oranges, pomegranates, laurel grapes. The heat of candles of the oil lamps raised the temperature, and in April to summer. An important associative role was assigned to music. In addition to polonaises, Poland was thought as a part of Russia. Moldovan dances and Little Russian dances sounded. Potemkin thought himself as a ruler of Moldova and Walachia. And Alamande was danced as a reminder of the Austrian Emperor Joseph II, head of the Western Roman Empire. The whole appearance of the palace drew images of the lands where the empress needed to strike. So a lot of symbolism. So this is a picture of the Cossack siege, where before the Catherine came there and Cossacks were crushed and resettled and went to Kuban, among others. And I just also would like to briefly mention that Ukrainian songs, the Russian court in the 18th century, not only in the 18th century, but also in the 18th century, were very belong to the favorite songs of the court, and many composers included them into their works. So, for example, also Mussorgsky and Sorokinska Yarmarka and the Na берегу у Ставка. This is one of the songs that is really we can really meet in many contexts.
So, continuing as knowing Khandoshkin as a Russian composer, he was known as Russian, and Russia was an umbrella term that included Ukrainians, which were known as Little Russians or Malorussi. This is labeled on his published works. In reality, Khandoshkin's heritage and his personal relationship suggest a man who had a more complex heritage and identity than the simple label of Russian. More broadly, the Russian court itself had much Ukrainian influences that would be expected. One of the most important establishments was the Gluchev school, and Hetman Danilo Apostol, and officially established by Empress Anna in 1738. The school focused on preparing child singers, and as we know, lots of Ukrainian musicians at the Russian court came from there. Hetman Razumovsky started his career as a singer in the Imperial Capella. Famous Pusli and Bandura players, Grigory Lubistok, Timofey Belogradsky, could be found playing Ukrainian music in imperial halls as well. There are multiple facts that point to Khandoshkin having specifically Ukrainian identity. First of all, Ivan's grandfather, as I mentioned, is coming from Veliki Perevoz. In different sources, Ivan's last name is spelled as Khandoshkin, Khandoshko, or Gondoshko. The last spelling is common last name for Cossacks in 17th century. Typically, people with such names looked after military horses. Secondly, you can see that where Danilo Apostol is born is in Veliki Sorochinci, and it's only 20 kilometers away. So, known that Khandoshkin's father were brought to St. Petersburg by Pavlo Apostol, a son of Hetman Danilo Apostol, so related to Apostol's family as they were kind of neighboring villages. And Pavlo was a colonel of Mirgorod district out of the city of Veliki Sorochinci, which is just 20 kilometers away. One of the first Russian historians, Vladimir Adayevsky, in his note on Khandoshkin, states that he was sent to Italy to study with the funding of Lev Narishkin. He also initially brought Khandoshkin to the court of Paul, who was Narishkin other than the patron of Khandoshkin? He was Oberstallmeister, a high-ranking official at the imperial court. However, he was best known as a generous entertainer and a buffoon who can, quote, talk for hours on any topic without the break, quote, according to Catherine. Lev Narishkin was married to a first cousin of Kirill and Alexei Razumovsky Marina. Both of her parents were from high-ranking Cossack family. Alexei and Kirill were registered Cossacks. Here's a note from Adayevsky saying that Narishkin funded his trip to Italy. This is a snapshot from the tree of Kirill Razumovsky, and you see that's Grigory Rozum and relatives and how Narishkin related to them. And so he was related to the most powerful Ukrainians in the Russian Empire. And thirdly, another famous Russian historian and writer, Fyodor Kony, is quoted in 1850 to say that Khandoshkin, the Malo-Russian composer, wrote more than 100 compositions for violin, meaning the Ukrainian who wrote more than 100 compositions. It was out of ordinary for Kony to specifically say the national identity of a person in his note. So this suggests that even 40 years after the death of Khandoshkin, other people were aware of his Ukrainian identity. And lastly, so this quote is here, and this is the picture related to Vasil Mirovich. Mirovich was an ethnic Ukrainian who tried to overthrow Catherine by rescuing Ivan VI, the legitimate emperor, from the prison. Mirovich was eventually executed in 1764. Khandoshkin was 17 at that time and only just starting his career at the court. His sonatas, however, were published at the beginning of 1800s when he was no longer working at the imperial court. So Dostoevsky says that the second sonata is dedicated to Mirovich. We're going to have a performance.
Small excerpt to give a sense of the piece. All right. So we looked into Ukrainian inspired songs. So when we had the chance to find a title or some elements of music that could be associated with Ukraine. So here we have from a study made by Soroka, some kind of element that stands out. For example, in the way that you were singing the other day, intervals that are presented, especially falling sixths, raising fifths and such. Here's a text I could not explain, but maybe you want to make.
So this is one of the songs that Khandoshkin also included in his work. So this is Kosari. I will just sing a small piece of it. Вийшли в поле косарі, косить ранком на зорі, гей, ну те косарі, бо не рано почали, хоч не рано почали, так багато утяли, до обіду покусили, острі коси потупили, гей, ну те косарі, бо не рано почали, хоч не рано почали, так багато утяли. So I should also mention that this is not that, so this type of sound and the way I produced this vocal sound is kind of more the classical way, right, to sing. This is the one that composers Khandoshkin also used in his composition, but not the way Khandoshkin used to listen to the song if he had a connection to this in his traditional way of perceiving the music. So, like say the Ukrainian, there are so many. I won't dive too deep into this, but Ukrainian singing tradition is also very rich on different types of vocal production and sound production. So, and they use very different types of resonance rooms, and some of them are like, for example, white voice or spivokrik that you might have heard about. And they create a more flattish type of sound, like and very different type of sound. So we can only guess which kind of sound Khandoshkin heard. Yeah. So yeah, and he included this song into his works, as I already mentioned, and also different elements that are considered associated with Ukrainian music. Yeah.
Okay, so in the context of this conference, placing the type of repertoire that Khandoshkin was developing at the time, it's important to realize the production of violin duets and solo violin works. that were taking place around Europe. And I'd like to just say the violin duet as a genre developed in Italy around the time of Corelli, the next generations. And there's like a long lineage from teacher to student to teacher to student and so on, as the duet is an ideal form of chamber music as it requires only two people. It's kind of simple for two violinists to get together and to produce this music, even improvise the music. If you have a melody, you can simply harmonize. So this idea of training violinists through duet is important. It is also a social exercise, as two artists may be joining forces for some event, inviting each other and so on. So that is one of the functions of duets. You see it happening across Europe. And then on a pedagogical level, as I was mentioning, that's also a tool for teaching techniques and the skills that are necessary, as much as the repertoire that may be national in character. So you will see, for example, in Khandoshkin, this insistence on Russian materials that he used. All the way to today, when you think of Suzuki or other methods that have developed over time, there's always an importance given, for example, for the young kids to learn the material or use materials that they are familiar with and apply them to the violin. So here I just want to bring to your attention a few of these names that will have an impact or that will have a relationship with Russia at the time and are known for writing duets or writing pedagogically in the genre of duet. Bayot on the left, Kreutzer from Paris, students of Viotti. Rod is another one that will visit Russia. Interestingly, in the case of Khandoshkin, the music, the method of the Paris Conservatoire was published in Russian, and at the end of it, appended to the music, simply transcribed or translated, were some duets by Khandoshkin. So he was already recognized as this presence in important repertoire for Russia. Continuing, a rival of, or maybe colleague, but I believe there was some animosity at some point, some competitive spirits, so at least Antonio Lolli, who was brought by Potemkin to the court and took kind of the high honors of playing for the court, even though he had some difficulty apparently fulfilling his obligations and was away quite often on tour. And his student, who followed him after Lolli disappeared for Naples. Lolli wrote a method of violin in the spirit of that one from Conservatoire, but quite original and interesting. I think worth a look for violinists of today. Very concise but effective. And here you have a picture of the time showing how violin duets would have been played. The art of playing a first voice and accompanying, here showing with standing and sitting. The violin duet as a genre evolved through the 18th century, and from Sommi and the tradition of the Italians, you have various students who became masters and writers of duets. So you have here Leclerc, Guillaume, who were very much rivals, could not stand each other. And that climate of competition was entertained by the court. It was often a competitive context where violinists would be put against each other, playing concerto against each other to establish who would be viewed as the leader or the supreme artist. In the case of Guignon, for example, on the left, he became the successor to Lully, so it gives you a sense of his powers. Giardini was also in Moscow, was unfortunately found there his demise. And then in the case of Pugnani and Viotti, Pugnani was a teacher of Viotti, and they established the modern violin playing as we know it through that conservatoire in Paris and so on. They were prolific writers of duets. And along with those duets, you have this spirit of the concertante, the two violin concerto, that is an extension essentially, and they were very common at public concerts. We were talking of Tartini and the likelihood maybe of Khandoshkin having studied at the School of Nations in Padua. There's nothing really that has confirmed that so far. Some people may believe it is the case. There's a very small window of possibility. However, he studied with likely students of, including Domenico Dall'Olio, who was very much involved at the court at the time. And many pieces again with Russian themes. So it was a fashion. It was established across. And in the case of duets, Tartini, I played a little bit, but as you continue into the piece of a solo sonata, you recognize the influence of Tartini with the different Italianate gestures and techniques. And finally, to see also the place of these duets in the overall story of the Russian violin tradition, I just put a small connection to future generations. So from Rode, who visited from the French, the German Spohr, and Wieniawski from Poland, who was appointed at the court also later on. And they all wrote duets in the more and more virtuosic and concertante style. So, for example, very common in our education nowadays, the etude caprice with a second violin. So carrying on this tradition of playing the duo. And all of this here, I outline here the amount of works that we know of Khandoshkin with relationship with Russian themes. So you can see that it is quite extensive in his production. So altogether, that is the end of our presentation. But before we end, we would like to leave you with some music. And Viktoria plays from Khandoshkin, and I accompany very humbly. And this is, can you tell us where it's from?
That's from the 6 ancient Russian songs. So number.